I found that I get more ideas out of it. Not so much like the content itself that I'm going to be using, but the ideas. And I've even found that even if I don't end up using the content, I do see that it helps me understand the product requirements a lot more than because it's almost like a brainstorming tool. You can plug in, hey, this is the product spec. This is what I got from the project manager. What does this mean? How can I say this in a different way? Or like, can you revise this? And I'll start to understand even better.
Welcome to the Knowledgebase Ninjas Podcast, where 𝐊𝐞𝐲 of Document 360 finds the best SaaS self-service knowledge bases in the world and then interviews their creators. Let's get started with today's episode.
Welcome everyone to another Knowledgebase Ninjas Podcast, and I'm very happy to introduce our next guest, who's Rene Santana, technical writer from Box. Welcome, Rene, to the podcast. How are you feeling today?
I'm feeling pretty good this early morning here in Dallas.
Hoping you had your first coffee and ready to share some of your experiences of how you got into this technical writing space in the first place, please.
Awesome. I initially got started out of college wanting to get into technical writing, but I really only had the experience of what I was doing in college. I did a little bit of UX and then some other report writing, but I didn't have any formal experience. So I got myself into an editorial job actually at an indie publishing company. Funny enough, I was in Washington State, and I had worked for this company here in Grapevine, Texas, funny enough. So a couple years later, like 4 to 5 years later, I found myself here in Dallas. But I had worked for that company for a little bit, and then I had applied to a couple places to kind of find myself like a content writing job or some sort of writing job. And there was one job that I got into that was a customer service representative job that I applied for. They called me, asked me to come in. I talked to them a little bit, showed some interest about technical writing. They knew I had an English degree. And then after that, I didn't hear back from that for that specific position, but a couple months later, they'd call me back saying they realized they needed a content writer role. So I was like, and then they called me back asking like, oh, can you come back since you had the English degree and you had some interest in documentation? So they were like, oh, great, come back and we actually have a role for you. And so I got to that was actually my first taste of doing some actual documentation, content writing. I had worked there for about a year or so, and then kind of the pandemic happened, so we was made redundant for a little bit, but then quickly got onto an infrastructure technical writing gig, and then after that went into a robotics and automation gig that was really fun because I got to actually work with developers, get to do some markdown writing, use Git and GitHub, and just play around with some robots in like a virtual Linux environment. And as a technical writer, that was pretty fun because we do that. We explore a lot of stuff that we don't really know at first, and then get that knowledge and be able to write about it and stuff. And then the 6 months gig ended, and I got an offer to join Box as a contractor. And I think mainly how it goes, it was actually quite a blessing because they was originally just like a 6-month contract. They weren't going to go anywhere with it, but it had been such a big help to them for me to be part of the team that they decided to hire me full time. And I've been at Box now for up to 2 years now, almost full time, and been loving it since. And now I lead some of the top products here at Box, including Box Sign and Box AI.
Brilliant. So amazing to hear the journey where you started and where you are now, Rene. And it's just so interesting to know how you started as a contractor with the current company, and then with all your dedication and contribution, they are happy with the projects you're doing. Everybody knows that now we are with the Gen AI, and artificial intelligence is just booming as we speak. Now, in today's technological landscape, how do you think the Gen AI or technologies like natural language processing influence the way how you started creating your documentation to where you are now?
I was gonna kind of just start by saying that it's kind of been an interesting journey with that because I remember reading about it not almost a few years back before it actually started to evolve more and more. I think it was with Notion that I saw
Mm.
that they had some AI capabilities. And at first I was like, this is interesting having to be able to plug in some prompts and then be able to get some responses back. It was really kind of in its infancy at that time. It was almost 2 years ago. And then to see a company like OpenAI kind of make that into something bigger, into something more available to everybody, no longer in beta, has been just a kind of a mind blowing experience, and has put a lot of people like, oh, what's going to happen next? But I think but that's what's been really exciting though, is that being able to see what people have been able to come up with, especially in technical writing. Because when I'd first done it, I think I'd only seen like one or two topics revolving
Mhm.
technical writing, and how we've influenced the space. And now about a year later, it's just that there's a whole conversation going on. I think especially in API documentation,
Mhm.
being able to use natural language models and stuff to generate code, or not only generate code but generate the documentation as well. And I think that's been something that's when I think about all the tools that I've seen go past during my time of doing technical writing, I feel like this definitely will be another well set tool in what we do, going from having to I was around to do the print area, but I was around to do a lot of the digital API documentation that was still fresh. And then now that's kind of changing, and we're going to be, I think, probably going to something more like having to use AI to at least help us summarize, generate some content. Um, and I'm still playing around with some ideas of like automating the content as well. But I think definitely the summarization and content generation has been two key players, at least I've seen, that have influenced the space of technical writing.
Great. So I just would like to understand, how do you make sure that the AI generated contents are aligning with your style of documentation, with the tone that you would like to have the contents in? How do you make sure?
For example, at Fox, I would try to follow what we have as a style guide, and make sure, or even just the language that we have set for the documentation. I need to make sure that whatever it outputs is still in line with what I'm trying to communicate with the user. Um, but I think uh, I'm not using it solely just like asking a question and trying to plug that in. It's definitely heavily edited and very specific, and I'm keeping it in line. And what I try to do is I try to, instead of prompting it or asking a question, I try to make sure it stays focused on the text that I'm working on. So I want it to keep the style of the text, whatever it is, and keep the formatting, and make sure it doesn't deviate too much from that. Because I think what I had learned from prompting and all that is that if I give it too much like free reign, it tends to add its own flair or add its own ideas. And if I'm not too careful, it'll start adding more words or changing the style up, and it's like that. Definitely don't want that. But I have found that I get more ideas out of it, not so much like the content itself that I'm going to be using, but the ideas. And I've even found that even if I don't end up using the content, I do see that it helps me understand the product requirements a lot more than because it's almost like a brainstorming tool. You can plug in, hey, this is the product spec. This is what I got from the project manager. What does this mean? How can I say this in a different way? Or like, can you revise this? And I'll start to understand even better. Especially trying to get have do a ton of meetings and stuff and get requirements. I can just easily get myself like a almost like my own personal like assistant to revise and review the content and understand it better. um and then in that way I can keep it controlled and not let it alter my guides or my the style of writing that I have at whatever company I'm at.
Mm-hmm. Brilliant. So it's just a small continuation to that question. Any tools or any AI-based features that you would like to recommend to our audiences today?
I know the biggest hot one is Open API and stuff, Chat GPT, and that's been a great one to use.
Mhm.
Um, I can, I believe it has now, it's open to Enterprise Plus customers, but I know we have a Box AI that I've been sort of using now that it's available to the public. That's been actually pretty helpful because we'll use it to um, for previewing documents. You can ask it questions, you can ask summarizations, and then we have it for notes as well. And you can do content generation and ask it questions there. And I've been using a little bit of it to help me summarize my content or to generate some content. That's been helpful. But I would say that I've seen a lot of folks use both like the ChatGPT and Anthropic's Claude. I've been following those two and been enjoying the using those two as far as getting a different tone out of each one. I personally just use OpenAI's ChatGPT because it's a little more accessible, and I found that it's even more accessible now since they've allowed users to just plug some prompt in without having to sign into an account or anything, which I thought was a nice big update. But I think those two, for at least as far as a technical writer goes, I've seen some other ones that are kind of interesting where they generate API documentation based on what you give it, and I thought that was can't quite remember what that was, but I thought that's some fun use cases, at least for us, for technical writers. I think that's about it.
All right, that's absolutely great. Now, everything looks great with AI, but do you think there could be some limitations or some ethical considerations to be aware when it comes to creating or using AI for documentation purposes?
I think the ethical concern definitely is being wary of how much of it do we use in our content, and that's been something that I always think about when I'm generating my content. Like, how much of this do I actually want in the content, and how much of it do I want as like pretty much like an inspiration to what I'm writing, or not inspiration, but like just brainstorming. And that's where we kind of we are now drawing that line right now. Like, okay, I'm only going to be using the stuff that I brainstorm rather than the actual content, or maybe it's good enough that I can use the generated content because it sounds almost like what I would write anyway. And I think the concern might be that we get a little too comfortable in being able to generate some content and plugging that in, and as we would write something really fast or write a draft, I think the main concern is that we get a little too ahead and draft content and then think that that's okay to probably use, not knowing if that content might have some additional information in there that's not correct. Because the more it gets, the bigger content we decide to use, the more we're going to be like, it probably is fine. But then if the larger the content, we might skim over something that like, oh, that was clearly incorrect. That shouldn't have been in there. And that's of course what review is for. But we are still generating that content, and we need to write it. And I found that when I get to write every single word, I'm of course knowing what is going into that content, not letting it to the machine. It's definitely my concern, at least for ethical. But I think for latter uses, definitely there's a little bit of concern of maybe not jumping on, like, and then that's why we still have to get into using AI a lot more in what we're doing now. The adoption, I think, for technical writers is pretty key right now, is to just get into it as much as they can. And it's going by really fast. Even when I'm using it, I feel like I'm trying to find all these use cases, and I see a lot of other technical writers find use cases, but then I still see a lot of tech writers just still unsure of what we're doing with it. And I think the more we get involved, the more we'll have answers to these questions of ethical concerns and use cases and how we actually will properly integrate it. And I know there's some fantastic folks out there that are really dipping their hand, like they're going full in on AI and just giving us some awesome use cases that I've definitely have been inspired by. And they're like, okay, this could be pretty awesome for our field. And I think especially I have found my best use case has just been for brainstorming, which has been awesome. But I do see, I've been seeing that ethical concern, especially with hallucinations. And I think the main thing that I've been able to, at least how to mitigate that, is to do my best in giving it only the information that I wanted to update. And I found that out was if we can somehow get it so that it can focus on a document or focus on a single piece of text and not deviate from that, then that's where it's going to be its best case usage, rather than just asking it, generate me this prompt with these parameters and all that. And I think that's great. But you're kind of trusting that it'll provide something that'll be good. And
Yeah.
I definitely know that I have made content or I have seen content from other folks and thought, oh, that looks fine. I think that's all right. And then try to plug it in and realize afterwards, wait a minute, I needed to double check that more. And so the more control you can have over your output, the better chances that you're going to have a safer results rather than trusting fully in the output.
Very well said, Rene. That's really good to know. And yeah, at the end of the day, documentation generated by AI should be thoroughly proofread, just for your own peace of mind as well.
Yeah, us especially when it comes around hallucinations and stuff, we definitely need to be fact checking anything we use with AI. And I think that's why it's a kind of an exciting time for us, because we can be sort of like the role models in making sure that when we use AI, we're definitely fact checking it as we would anything that we would document. It's going through a review process. It's people are seeing it. We're making sure it gets in front of many eyes, and so that it doesn't um, go unnoticed if there's some sort of content that was like, wait, that was not correct, and that might have been generated by AI, and we needed to check that. If we're like, oh, if tech writers have a way of figuring out how to deal with this, then it's like, well, we're going to be leading the way and providing more into that, instead of feeling like, oh no, it's going to generate content. And what am I going to do now? It's like, no, we may write the content, but we still have to review it, and we do make the process to review it. And so we're still going to very much have a critical role in this AI development era.
True, very true. Let's move on to the rapid fire round questions now. You looks like you've been reading quite a lot out what's up happening recently. So can you share some documentation related resources or any event that you have attended when it comes to technical writing?
I think the biggest one, and I've heard this in a couple of the other podcasts or the episodes, was definitely the Write the Doc Slack channel. We have a specific channel for AI that is just like every week I've seen something brimming on it, and definitely have enjoyed reading through it. Dina Parashut-Haman, and she's been a great resource for technical writers in AI, because she does a lot of writing for how we've been using AI recently in her examples. And some of it has kind of just opened my mind up to a lot of possibilities.
Great. And what is that one word that comes to your mind when someone says documentation?
Helpfulness.
Thank you. And my last question to you is, what is that one piece of documentation related advice you would give to a 20-year-old self?
Always be gathering as much information as possible. If you don't have any information ready, then it's hard to write any piece of documentation. Mm-hmm. So the more information you can get, the more points, the more interviews you can do, just will help you understand how to do cross-functional writing, how to do reviews and all this stuff. Pretty much just as much information you can gather, from requirements to to the users, to whoever it's going to be, kind of drafting all of that outline. And that's all, you can get all of this just from, working closely with PMs, working closely with all the, even not even just PMs, you can work with sales teams, you can work with even your legal team, marketing teams, and just gathering as many requirements for this, because especially if it's public facing, you're going to want to make sure that it has the most updated and accurate information. And even if you don't use all of the information that you gather, definitely hold on to it, because it'll be probably used later on for reference to build a kind of like a scaffolding and structure that will help you understand your docs a lot better.
Yeah, absolutely. Very well said, Rene. Well, that's the end of my questions, but feel free to add anything that I missed to ask you, or any last points you would like to give to our audiences today.
General message to a lot of technical writers is to continue. I think, and I remember it was a previous podcast episode that someone had mentioned, but not getting quite comfortable with like the tool set that you have now, because it's going to likely change. And I think that speaks loudly to the AI era right now is like we have a lot of tools, we have a lot of methods that we use that we get comfortable with, but even with AI, a lot of that's going to shift. So really encouraging technical writers, even if you don't quite know how to integrate AI, playing around with it is still the first step. Getting it to you generate some content, getting it to summarize or whatever it is you need to kind of get working with it. I highly encourage working whatever way you can with it, because it's going to be a major player here soon or it's just like a critical tools in what we're working on and how we operate as technical writers.
Thank you so much for all the contributions, Rene, towards the community and for participating in this podcast. It's been a wonderful last half an hour interacting with you. And all I can say is all the very best for your upcoming projects. And we wish you to contribute more to the community.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me on here. It was really exciting.
Take care.
Thanks for listening to today's episode of the Knowledgebase Ninjas Podcast. Please head to iTunes, rate, and provide honest feedback on the podcast. See you next week.